Pastor Jonathan Reed and Sister Mary Clare were the pride of Willow Creek. A pastor admired for his wisdom, a nun celebrated for her devotion, but behind closed doors, their secret connection grew, forbidden and dangerous, until one night it erupted into a shocking tragedy that would shake the entire town to its core. The town of Willow Creek was the kind of place that seemed untouched by time. Streets were lined with old oak trees, whose branches intertwined like the fingers of friends. Neighbors waved to each other over white picket fences, and the smell of fresh bread from the small bakery near the town square often drifted through the morning air. At the heart of this idyllic setting stood St. Michael's Church, its tall steeple, a landmark visible from every corner of town. The building was ancient, with stained glass windows depicting saints and angels, and the sound of its bell echoed across the streets every hour. People came to the church for Sunday services, weddings, baptisms, and even funerals, placing their trust in the familiar routine and in the leaders who guided them. Pastor Jonathan Reed had been the spiritual shepherd of Willow Creek for nearly a decade. In public, he was the image of devotion, a calm presence at prayer, a comforting voice in times of sorrow, and a man whose sermons were filled with wisdom and warmth. Congregants admired his ability to make each person feel seen, as though their struggles were understood and their faith matters were personal to him. He was polite, approachable, and well-liked, and over the years he had built an image of unwavering integrity. He was the kind of man people assumed could never do anything to shatter their sense of security. Sister Mary Clare was equally respected. Young, gentle, and devoted, she had chosen the path of service at a very early age. She dedicated herself to the community, helping the sick, the elderly, and the children in Willow Creek. Her calm presence was comforting, and her quiet kindness earned her admiration not just from parishioners but from everyone who crossed her path. She seemed almost ethereal in her devotion, her smile gentle but unwavering, her steps always purposeful. To most she was the embodiment of faith and purity, someone untouchable by the complexities and temptations of the world outside the convent wall. On the surface, life in Willow Creek appeared perfect. The church thrived, the town remained close-knit, and the routines of worship, charity, and fellowship continued without disruption. But even in the most peaceful places, shadows can grow quietly, unseen and unnoticed. Within the ancient stone walls of St. Michael's, a subtle tension had begun to emerge. No one outside the church would have guessed that behind the neatly polished pews and serene altar, the secret was slowly taking root. The closeness between Pastor Jonathan and Sister Mary Clare was something the townspeople had never witnessed. A connection that went unnoticed, not because it was clever, but because it was carefully hidden under layers of ordinary interaction. The first signs were almost imperceptible. Parishioners noticed that the pastor lingered longer near the convent than usual, that Sister Mary Clare sometimes appeared lost in thought during prayers, her gaze distant, almost distracted, small, easily dismissed occurrences, like shared smiles that seemed to hold more than simple friendliness, were seen, but no one paid them much attention. The town was too trusting, too accustomed to the comfort of routine to question the subtle shifts that were quietly unfolding. And yet, the foundation of that trust was already beginning to crack. Inside St. Michael's, two lives were slowly intertwining in a way that defied rules, morality, and expectation. What had begun as respect and admiration between a pastor and a nun was quietly evolving into something far more complicated. There was a tension now, palpable only to those in the room but invisible to the world outside. A tension that would in time set the stage for events that no one in Willow Creek could have predicted. Beneath the stained glass windows, behind the altar and the quiet prayers, a secret was forming. One that would ripple through the town and alter the lives of everyone who had once felt safe in the serene shadow of St. Michael's Church. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a small crack forming in a wall that everyone assumed was solid. Pastor Jonathan Reed and Sister Mary Clare found themselves drawn together in ways that went beyond shared faith or mutual respect. What began as casual conversations about parish matters slowly deepened into long discussions about life, doubt, and loneliness. They spoke about things that no one else in Willow Creek could understand: personal fears, hidden struggles, and the weight of expectations placed upon them. Their words, spoken in hushed tones within the quiet corners of the church, carried a kind of intimacy that neither had anticipated. The meetings began innocently. Jonathan would linger after evening prayers to discuss the needs of the parish, or Mary Clare would request his guidance on spiritual matters. At first, these encounters were merely functional, bound by duty, but gradually the boundaries that once seemed clear began to blur. A hand lingering a fraction too long on a shoulder, a gaze that lasted a heartbeat longer than politeness allowed, small, seemingly accidental gestures that planted seeds of a forbidden connection. Both knew the line they were crossing, yet neither could resist the pull toward the other. By the time the first month had passed, their connection had grown into something far more complicated. The hidden corners of St. Michael's became their sanctuary. They would meet in rooms seldom used, tucked away behind thick wooden doors, where no eyes could pry and no ears could overhear. In the dim light of candlelit hallways, they discovered the thrill and danger of secrecy. Every glance, every moment of closeness was charged with the knowledge that discovery would shatter everything they had worked to build: faith, reputation, and community trust. The emotional intensity of their relationship was like fire contained in a glass jar, small, dangerous, and impossible to donor. They were acutely aware of the risks. Willow Creek was a town that trusted its spiritual leaders without question. A scandal could devastate the parish, ruin careers, and destroy lives. Yet, paradoxically, the very act of hiding their connection strengthened it. The secrecy itself became addictive, each secret, a validation of their growing bond. In those moments, they were not pastor and nun. They were simply two people who understood one another in a way no one else could. Even as their feelings deepened, subtle signs of tension began to appear. Jonathan became increasingly distracted during sermons, his eyes betraying thoughts that lingered elsewhere. Mary Clare, once serene and composed, sometimes seemed restless, caught in moments of quiet contemplation that no one could decipher. They maintained outward appearances perfectly, but the intensity of their connection created cracks in their composure. The closer they grew, the more dangerous their world became, and yet neither could pull away. The small town remained oblivious. Parishioners continued to admire both figures, seeing only devotion and grace. But within the walls of the church, an invisible storm was brewing. It was a storm fueled by desire, secrecy, and the undeniable thrill of forbidden love. What had begun as shared understanding had evolved into a tangled web of emotion, and the consequences of their actions were already starting to ripple outward, though no one could yet see them. As autumn approached, the nights grew longer and shadows stretched deeper across the stone floors of St. Michael's. Every secret meeting, every stolen moment, seemed to carry a heavier weight. Both Pastor Jonathan and Sister Mary Clare were trapped in the duality of their lives, publicly devout, privately bound in a dangerous, undeniable bond. What neither realized was that their passion, hidden from the eyes of the town, was setting the stage for events far darker than either could imagine. Their connection was no longer just a secret, it was the spark that would ignite a series of shocking, irreversible consequences. In the quiet of the convent halls, in the stillness of the rectory at night, a love forbidden by vows and morality was taking hold. A love that would not remain hidden for long, and that would eventually force Willow Creek to confront a truth it was not prepared to see. Rumors in Willow Creek began as whispers, soft and easily ignored, like the rustle of leaves in the wind. At first, no one thought much of it when parishioners noticed Pastor Jonathan lingering near the convent longer than necessary, or when Sister Mary Clare seemed distracted during prayers. But small towns are like glass. They reflect every movement, every shadow, and eventually, nothing remains hidden. It started subtly. A janitor reported seeing shadows moving in the rectory late at night, figures passing quickly through hallways that were supposed to be empty. Someone else noticed a door slightly ajar where it should have been locked. On the surface, these were insignificant details, easy to dismiss as accidents or coincidences. But each observation planted a seed of doubt in the minds of those who trusted their spiritual leaders without question. Rumors spread quietly at first, whispered in hushed tones over coffee at the bakery or while tending gardens along the town streets. People speculated about late-night visits, unusual behavior, and the odd closeness between two individuals whose lives were supposed to be governed by devotion and restraint. Even without evidence, suspicion grew like an invisible wildfire, consuming trust and replacing it with fear. Meanwhile, within St. Michael's, the intensity of the pastor and the nun's secret meetings increased. The thrill of their hidden connection gave rise to recklessness. They were no longer content with fleeting glances or brief encounters. They sought prolonged moments, hiding in rooms behind locked doors, careful yet audacious. The secrecy that had once made their connection exciting now carried the risk of exposure with every passing day. As the town's suspicion mounted, their own paranoia began to grow. They noticed subtle changes in the way parishioners looked at them, eyes lingering too long, subtle glances exchanged among congregants. Every smile, every candles knocked over, doors left unlocked, small items out of place. No one could explain these occurrences, and they only fueled the sense that something was wrong. The church, once a sanctuary of peace, began to feel tense and fragile, as if the very walls sensed the secret brewing inside. For Pastor Jonathan and Sister Mary Clare, the danger was no longer hypothetical. Every look from a congregant felt loaded with accusation. Every casual conversation held the potential for exposure. Their private world, once safe and controlled, now teetered on the edge of collapse. The intimacy that had drawn them together was now intertwined with fear, and the line between excitement and dread blurred with each secret encounter. Willow Creek, a town that had once taken pride in its serenity and faith, was beginning to feel the first tremors of scandal. Suspicion was no longer a rumor. It had become a presence, subtle yet undeniable. And in the quiet corners of St. Michael's Church, Pastor Jonathan and Sister Mary Clare faced the chilling realization that their secret could not remain hidden forever. Something, or someone, was watching, and when the truth finally surfaced, the consequences would be nothing short of shocking. The stage was set. The hidden tension, the whispered rumors, and the growing fear had created a fragile web, one misstep away from unraveling. The town had no idea that what seemed like minor gossip was merely the beginning of a story that would end in tragedy and disbelief. The night it happened, Willow Creek was shrouded in a storm. Rain lashed against the rooftops, and wind tore through the trees lining the quiet streets. Most of the town had retreated indoors, comforted by the familiar routine of home, but at St. Michael's Church, something far more sinister was unfolding. Firefighters were called to the rectory just after midnight, responding to reports of smoke rising from the building. When they arrived, the storm made visibility nearly impossible. The church itself seemed untouched, its tall steeple silhouetted against the flashes of lightning. But the rectory was another story. Smoke poured from the windows, curling around the wet stone walls. As the firefighters entered, they found chaos, furniture overturned, papers scattered, and the smell of burned candle wax thick in the air. Then they discovered them. Pastor Jonathan Reed and Sister Mary Clare were in a small locked room at the back of the rectory, their bodies lifeless, slumped against one another in a way that suggested they had tried to escape the disaster, but had failed. The flames hadn't reached them directly, and there were no obvious wounds. The scene was eerily calm, almost staged. Investigators would later describe it as a perfect stillness, as if time had stopped. Initial theories of the fire being accidental quickly unraveled. There was no evidence of a short circuit, no trace of arson in the usual sense. What puzzled investigators most was the faint smell of something chemical, subtle but persistent. Toxicology reports would later reveal the shocking truth. Both had been poisoned. The drink they had shared earlier, meant as a simple gesture of refreshment, had been laced with a deadly substance. Someone had planned this carefully, ensuring that the tragedy would strike at exactly the right moment. The town was thrown into chaos. Willow Creek, a place where people had lived in trust and faith for generations, could not comprehend what had happened. Questions raced through the community. Who would do this? Why, and why target the two individuals most admired in the parish? Fear replaced the usual calm of Sunday mornings, suspicion replaced casual greetings, and everyone looked over their shoulder, wondering if someone among them was capable of such cruelty. The investigation uncovered more disturbing details. The room where the bodies were found was locked from the inside, suggesting that the victims had not been forcibly restrained. The candle on the table had been tipped over, its flame extinguished before the fire spread, adding to the sense that this was no accident. Every piece of evidence seemed designed to confuse, to make the tragedy seem natural, while hiding the cruel intent behind it. Even as the town mourned, the search for answers revealed a darker reality. The killer had intimate knowledge of the rectory, of the routines of Pastor Jonathan and Sister Mary Clare, and of the layout of the building itself. This was no random act of violence. It was meticulously calculated. Every step, from lacing the drink to choosing the timing during the storm, had been planned. The person responsible had waited for the perfect combination of isolation, fear, and opportunity. Willow Creek struggled to process the horror. The church, once a symbol of faith and community, had become a place of suspicion and sorrow. Parishioners, once comforted by their leaders, now grappled with betrayal and fear, and behind closed doors investigators continued to piece together the last hours of Pastor Jonathan and Sister Mary Clare's lives, slowly uncovering the chain of events that had turned forbidden love into deadly tragedy. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside. The quiet town that had once trusted in the sanctity of its church now faced a reality that no one could have predicted. What began as whispers and secret meetings had ended in poison and fire. A shocking revelation that would haunt Willow Creek for years to come. The aftermath of the tragedy left Willow Creek in stunned silence. Parishioners wandered the streets in disbelief, unable to reconcile the image of their beloved pastor and devoted nun with the reality of their deaths. The church, once a sanctuary of comfort and faith, now felt haunted. Every pew, every stained glass window, seemed to hold a memory of the forbidden love that had ended in poison. Grief mingled with suspicion, and no one felt safe placing trust in their neighbors, not even in the small, familiar town where everyone had known everyone else for years. Investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the events that led to the horrific night. What initially seemed like a random tragedy quickly revealed signs of meticulous planning. The poison in the drink, the precise timing of the storm, and the locked room all pointed to a perpetrator who had intimate knowledge of both the rectory and the daily routines of Pastor Jonathan and Sister Mary Clare. This was not a crime of passion or opportunity. It was calculated, deliberate, and chillingly cold. The investigation led to an unexpected revelation. The person responsible was someone the town had never suspected, a longtime member of the congregation. Someone who had admired both the pastor and the nun deeply and had been obsessed with the idea of protecting the church from scandal. Fearful that their secret connection would ruin the reputation of St. Michael's, the individual had convinced themselves that eliminating both of them was a way to preserve the parish's sanctity. The motive was neither greed nor revenge. It was twisted devotion, a warped sense of loyalty that had driven them to murder. The confession shocked the community. The very person who had once been entrusted with the well-being of the church had become the agent of its darkest nightmare. The town struggled to comprehend how admiration could transform into lethal obsession, and how a desire to protect faith could justify such cruelty. For Willow Creek, the lines between good and evil, devotion and obsession, became irreversibly blurred. The scandal shattered more than the congregation's sense of security. It shattered the narrative of morality that the town had clung to. Parishioners wrestled with guilt for failing to notice the warning signs, anger at the perpetrator, and sorrow for the lives lost. Families whispered about the scandal in private. Children asked questions no adult knew how to answer, and the church itself became a site of fearful curiosity, a monument to both devotion and tragedy. Even years later, the story of Pastor Jonathan and Sister Mary Clare remained etched into the town's memory. Their forbidden love, once hidden in secret corners and quiet halls, had been exposed in the most horrifying way imaginable. The town that had once celebrated faith now carried a story of betrayal, obsession, and death. A cautionary tale that would echo through generations. Every visitor to St. Michael's felt the weight of history, the tension between devotion and desire, and the reminder that even sacred spaces can conceal dangerous secrets. In the end, Willow Creek learned a harsh truth. Love, obsession, and secrecy, when intertwined with fear and control, can destroy lives and communities. What had begun as quiet admiration and emotional closeness between a pastor and a nun ended in tragedy, revealing the fragility of trust and the darkness that can lurk even in places meant to inspire faith. The town never fully recovered, and the names of Pastor Jonathan Reed and Sister Mary Clare became a story whispered in warning, a tale of forbidden passion that ended shockingly and forever changed a community that had believed itself untouchable. Willow Creek would remember the tragedy not just for the shocking crime, but for the lessons it left behind, that secrets can fester, that devotion can be twisted, and that even the purest intentions can collide with human obsession to create a horror no